Part 23. After my death, the villain blackened again. Author, Ben Gongwei Pang. Chapter 223. After hearing that the Qi and Che general who is now gaining momentum seems to have fallen into the door of Prince's deadly enemy, the third prince, Yanj said to the prince, His Royal Highness, there are now many parties in the DPRK and China, especially the three princes are soliciting power courtier. General Che Riding holds military power and is also a nobleman. People like him should not stand in line to protect Mengj. He must support the three princes and must have misunderstood His Royal Highness. I have asked Cao Lao to visit him the side, and reached out and rubbed his eyebrows. He did not let Cao Lao enter. Yanj said, Your Highness, let me try it. The prince raised his head, his lips slightly pursed, and stared blankly at Yan Song. The two have been together for almost 2 years. In these 2 years, Yanj is not only a book boy around the prince, she will also do something for the prince as a guest of the prince. She helps the prince to plan, and she is a small think tank. And prince, he is still thin, but in the past 2 years, he has experienced more things, and the immatureness in his eyebrows has become a daunting majesty. Even if he was expressionless at this moment, his body naturally exuded majesty. If you are an ordinary person, you may be faint because of his aura. Yan Ji gets along with him day and night, and he has learned 80% of his temper. She kept his eyes on his face. Your Highness, are you worried? The prince beckoned and signaled that the song was approaching. As Yanj leaned closer, he reached out and pinched his jaw, making Yanj's face closer to him. Jun, he said softly, you are a woman. Unconsciously, it has been 2 years. 2 years later, he was only happy for her at first, but now, she seems to be using her identity as a day job. She did a good job, but no matter how hard she tried, she was just a woman, just his Maggie. How could the general who supported the car ride support the three princes? Where can he not be clear? She used to ride the general's childhood sweetheart, and she made an engagement with him. Everyone else can persuade the general who rides the car, but she can't. She should avoid it. Why is she so open now? In her heart, hasn't she ever remembered that Kijia Dalan? He reached out, touched her eyebrows, and slowly capped, June. His eyes were tinged with affection, only her eyebrows were left in his eyes. In case you get knocked out by him too, this palace should be very distressed. Yanj grabbed his hand, His Royal Highness, I'll see him. Losing such a help is too much loss for His Royal Highness. Between the beds, even if he tangled her again and again, in the study, elsewhere, they were the relationship between the prince and the book boy. Even if there were no one else in the house, they never did anything that went beyond it. The Prince Edward reacted today. The words are due to being jealous. After all, she and Kijia Dalan's affairs can be known with a little check. Prince Edward is still talking hard, but the palace only wants the king to be safe and sound, but it is just a car and riding general. The twisted melon is not sweet. He does not like the palace, and the palace will not stagnate. Singing and laughing, joking, His Highness knew that the strong twisted melon is not sweet. Why did you grab the good housewife from the beginning? These words may be fine if they are not on weekdays, but in such cases, it is easy for the prince to misunderstand that the song is resentful and that Dalan is still thinking about it. The prince did not speak, his fingertip paused on Yanj's lips, he still looked at Yanj, his eyes lingering. For a long time, he whispered, because I like it, I like Jun so much. Even if the melon is not sweet, I am just as happy. After my death, the villain blackened again. Author, Ben Gongwei Pang. Chapter 224. After that, the prince suddenly held the belt of Yanj by his hand, pulled Yanj closer to her arms, and touched her skirt with the other hand. Looking down, he kissed her lips, blocking all her words in. What is the difference between her makeup and a man now? Yanj couldn't understand her, so how could the prince still quit? And the attitude of the prince today is obviously not the same as in the past. So his abnormal response now is jealous? Eat the vinegar of Kijia Dalan she has never seen? It really surprised her. Probably it was the vinegar that inspired the prince's fighting spirit. He pressed the Yanj on the table case, and came in from behind. He hugged Yanj's body tightly, intersected and intertwined. His strength was unprecedented. Too big to seem to want to crush the words into his body. Would you like to see him? The prince covered her voice faintly in her ears. Yanji smiled sideways at him, with a smile between his eyes and brows. Zion, you don't mind his relationship with me? Zion is the word for Prince Edward. When the bed mantle is long, he calls her Jun Jun, and she calls him Zion. She groaned for a long time because of his strength. She was pressed by him on the table and couldn't move. With his movements, her neck was leaning back. If she didn't hold the table with both hands, he would have been hit by the ground. Already. She didn't wait for him to respond, and said with a smile, Zion has swallowed this bitter gourd into my belly, how can I forget others? She squeezed her chin and forced her head to turn against him. At this moment, the prince, without the fragility, without the thinness, his eyes staring at the song are faint, like a black hole with no bottom, and the light in his eyes, like the burning flame, seems to consume the song at the next moment. Laughing at words, laughing at heart, smiling charming, soft voice, Zion, you care so much about me, I feel very happy inside. She squinted slightly, tears oozing from the corners of her eyes, I'm so happy inside. He lowered his head and pecked her eyes, don't you really miss him? Sure enough, still jealous. It turns out that being jealous can turn a little sheep into a wolf cub, how terrible. Yanji reached out his hand, holding his side of his face, and smiled like Zuyu, pulsing gently, spreading everywhere, in my life, I only care about remembering Zion. He exerted his strength again and rested his head on her back. She didn't get his response, and couldn't see his expression on his face. The first absurdity in the study was like a storm. This was also the prince's first counterattack. Not only did the counterattack succeed, but it also won a great victory. Of course, at the cost of mess in the study after the fact. Both Yanj's paralysis and the prince were paralyzed on the bed, and there was no intention to move. Yanj is tired, obviously the prince is more tired than her. The flushing faded, and the prince's fair face was whiter. Although Yanj closed her eyes, she could also feel the prince's breathing sound and the undulating chest. The prince's bones have always been very poor, and he can stay in bed for more than 10 days with a little wind. Even in summer, he often wears thick. So most of the beds are dominated by words. Like today, this is really the first time for the prince. This study is different in the bedroom, still a little cold. Yanji pulled the quilt to the prince's body, and touched the prince's forehead. The squinting prince suddenly grabbed Yanji's hand and sighed, this body is still too weak. The voice is vague, like a nightmare, but the song is true. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. After my death, the villain blackened again. Author, Ben Gongwei Pang. Chapter 225. Yanji bowed his head and approached the prince, his voice seduced lowly, which body is not weak? The prince slackened his hands while holding Yanj, and wondered whether he had heard Yanj's question, and the whole person fell into a lethargy. The prince this time was probably tossing too much, his essence was weak, his blood was weak, and he was in bed for half a month to get better. The chicken can't see it, you talk about you follow such a bean sprouts, what do you mean? Yanj thinks she is different from the chick, so she pretends to be dumb and ignore the words of the chick. When the prince was a little better, she asked the prince again to ask for a ride as a guest to ride the general's house. At that time, the prince was looking through a file and heard the words, looked up at the words. He pursed his lips, his eyes gloomy, and seemed to be sorry the next moment. Yanj ignored his expression, and said softly, I still don't want to be reconciled, Your Highness is so good, I don't want outsiders to misunderstand His Highness. Her soft voice fell into his heart like a fine rain, causing his throat to roll, and the anger at the tip of his tongue swallowed into his stomach. You met him, would you suddenly regret following me? How could that be? Even this prince, even for 2 years, he seemed to be more mature than ever before in terms of dealing with people and thoughts, but when he said it, Yan Ji felt that this guy was really a child's heart. She smiled and looked at him. His Royal Highness is too unconfident in herself. He opened his mouth and said nothing. He didn't have confidence in himself, but he didn't trust her. He did not want to bet, so this time, he rejected her. Yan Song was not angry as he expected. But on the second day, he talked about it while making tea with him. She was justified, and said that the large and small battles experienced by General Che, people like him should have a rule of their own. Your Highness, I go to General Che's residence as a guest of the prince's house. Convince him, not go as Her Highness woman. I'm dressed like this, and no one has identified my identity so far, not to mention General Ride. He waited for her to finish all the words before he took the tea cup she handed. With a shake of his hand, ripples in the cup swelled. He looked down and stared at the ripples in the cup. Want to go? Well, Yanj said immediately, for nothing else, but for Your Highness, I have to go. She looked at him softly, I want to share something for Your Highness. He didn't look up to see her, in fact, he didn't have to look, he could feel the tender affection that her eyes fell on him. Is it for him? He was a little confused, and holding the cup tightly, he finally said, go where you want. At the end, he added, Ching San Ching Si follows you. Thank Your Highness for your trust. Yan Ji smiled happily, High Royal Highness. Okay. He took a sip of tea and swallowed the pain from the tip of his tongue into his belly. Then he looked up at her, if anything happens between you and him, this palace will kill him. In the end, he wasn't frightened, but his eyes were murderous. Yan Ji and Prince Edward have been together for so long, it was the first time to see him. She smiled a moment, and immediately smiled, His Royal Highness, in this life, you do not give up, I do not leave, the heart of the young king, only the next high. He didn't speak. But for a lifetime, like a moment of opening and closing her eyes, can't she think he will be rare? After my death, the villain blackened again. Author, Ben Gongwei Pang. Chapter 226. Song whispered in doubt, His Royal Highness. The Crown Prince put down the cup and reached out to lift her chin, remember what you said today. Yan Ji hurried back and avoided, His Royal Highness, I'm your book boy now. To be seen by others and thought it was his man's pet, it has affected her image so much. The prince tilted his head slightly and looked at her. Obviously he is a thin and fragile man, apparently his facial features are partial to women, but his whole body makes people dare not to be underestimated. When the bed was taken off, it looked like a bunny fawn, but when he was dressed, he turned instantly like a set of armor. This guy, why is so jealous? Yan Ji approached helplessly, sitting on his side, kneeling, pulling his sleeves, His Royal Highness, I believe Jun Jun is okay. Go, he said, go early and return early. Yanj knew that his heart was unsolved, but he couldn't force it. He nodded reluctantly, well, Your Highness, when Jun Jun returns, bring your favorite Osman thus cake with Yoon Dekchuan, okay. This prince does not like sour or spicy, especially sweets and pastries. However, he always covers up well, and this preference is clear. The prince nodded. Yan Ji then stepped forward. Out of the octagonal loft, she felt relieved. For 2 years, she was consolidating herself, and the prince was obviously growing. If one day you find that the vase you play with on the palm of your hand has become a cactus in your hands, will the prince at that time still be patient with her even though she is dissatisfied with her? Of course not. Sooner or later, she and the prince will have a hard battle to fight. So although she went to Cheky General Mansion as a guest of the prince's house, Yan Ji did not intend to persuade Cheky to follow the words she had told the prince. Presumably, the gatekeeper was not allowed to enter the area related to the prince. The Kijia Dalan really likes and dislikes, not even the prince's people give the slightest face. Just stop people outside the door. Yan Ji stood upright at the door, and he just settled. She still didn't believe when the guy didn't leave the house. It was also good luck, and Yanj didn't wait too long before seeing the closed side door open, and Chijia Dalan and Chijia Erlang, wearing plain clothes, talked to each other while walking outward. The host did not have any impression of Chijia Dalang after becoming a general, but Yan Ji guessed it. She did not expect that the two brothers would be together. For a moment, Yan Ji didn't miss this opportunity, and hurriedly walked over. He made a note of Dejia Kilang, general, in the next son, has always heard of the general's prestige. It is a great honor to be seen today. Chijia Dalang Ben glanced casually. There was a gatekeeper outside the door of the prince's house. He had known about it for a long time, but he wanted to open his mouth and narrowed his lips after glancing at the words. Although a mother compatriot, it is different from Swen King Jun, a scholar of Kijia Erlang, with a strong eyebrow and big eyes. He is a burly man with very strong features. He doesn't say anything, he just gives it the sturdy sense of race. It turned out to be Mr. Zijun, the most beloved in Prince's mansion now, and never thought that Mr. Zijun should be so young. Chijia Erlang snorted coldly, and the word Mr. he was especially heavy. Song is a book-boy-born guest. A bit late, the second one is also late, isn't it? After my death, the villain blackened again. Author, Ben Gongwei Pang. Chapter 227. Yanj's makeup is not magical, but people today don't expect Yanj to be a woman. Naturally, they will not pay special attention to it, they will only dismiss Yanj, a man who likes to sweep and wipe powder, and it is really a shame to the men. Kijia Erlang is one of the people who suspected of abandoning songs. Jijiji, who is very well versed in words, smiled, thanks for the praise. The words fell on Kijia Dalan's body again. The prince has a sweet-scented Osman thus cake which is the most favorite of Yoon Dekchuan. Zijun just went out and bought 2 copies. She dangled the snack bag in her hand, like a gossip, and sighed, that beautiful G has a bad stomach and is very picky. She is very gloomy in the day, but she is beautiful but very delicate. Alas, she is as gentle as a prince. Only benevolent people can tolerate such a beautiful lady. As soon as she said this, Kijia Erlang's face became flushed. He stared at the song, squeezed his fingers, and just about to open his mouth. Kijia Dalan already said, I heard that Mr. Zijun handed over the post, what's it like to stand at the door? Singing and laughing, but disrespectful. Kijia Erlang was also going to follow the door, but he paused for a moment when Kijia Dalan glanced. He stared at Yan Ji's back. Although he was unwilling, he didn't dare to follow Chijia Dalan and Yan Ji, but went to the tea room to wait after entering the door. From the door to the flower hall, this road is silent to each other. I have to say that Yanj still admires Chijia Dalan's stability. After all, most people will definitely ask her some questions on this way. But when he entered the flower hall, Yanj changed his image of Dalan's steadiness instantly. The guy waited for the next person to send tea to close the door, then suddenly got up and rushed to the song. Fortunately, the two were sitting far away. Although Yan Ji had no force, she was alert, hurriedly evaded, and sternly asked Chijia Dalan, General, why are you here? Qijia Dalan couldn't make a hit, and he bullied himself again, forcing Yanj to the side of Liangzhu, raising his feet to Yanj's legs, and reaching out to pinch the neck of Yanj who was about to fall. Yanj, there is a MMP who doesn't know when to speak or not. Is she asking you to come, or is the prince asking you to come? Qijia Dalan raised his head higher than Yanj. He persecuted Yanj like this, it was like a small hill covering him. What's more, his energy is not light at all, and Yanj has the illusion of being strangled by him. Listening to his questioning, Yanji suddenly felt funny. She stared at him, clearly his eyes were as sharp as a hawk eye, but Yanji was not half afraid. She relieved her breath, and asked in a hoarse voice, what about her? What about the prince? Her neck was pinched by him, her toes were almost off the ground, and her throat was out of breath. That's what she tried to get out of the neck. After all, losers can't lose. But after Qijia Dalan's fingers rubbed around Yanj's neck for a moment, his hands loosened, and Yanj's feet finally fell to the ground. Although he was still pinching Yanj's neck, anyway, he didn't work so hard. He lowered his head and stared at Yanj. She's in Prince's house, how's it going? I really do nt remember the host, it's ironic. If I remember, why did nt it appear from beginning to end? Yanji wanted to laugh twice, but one cough was a cough. She coughed a few times before she looked up and regained her momentum to meet his gaze. Prince is gentle and kind, how could she be bad in Prince Edward? You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. After my death, the villain blackened again. Author, Ben Gong Weipang. Chapter 228. After a pause, Yan Ji said with a smile, she is also a cousin of Qi family, and Qi family is also half of her maiden family. She asked me to ask a word about the general. Qi family had decided to sell his wife for glory that day. Why is this wrong? Hua Road ruined today. Is this going to force her to die? Qijia Dalan didn't say anything. He kept staring at Yan Ji. Those eyes were as sharp as two big knives, trying to pierce Yan Ji's eyes like a bamboo shoot. But the song did not give him such a chance. She reached out and went to Qijia Dalan to pinch her neck. Hand, General, I respect you, I hope you can give me half respect, you are the visitor, you this is not to me the bully street bully. Qijia Dalan's palm is wide and the back of his hand is full of bones. It is not that Yanj's hand can shake. Although he did not retract his hand, the grip of Yanj's neck is loosened a little. I didn't seem to hear the words of the song, and just asked, how is she doing? With a large sword in his eyes and a constriction, only the pain of self-bearing and oppression was left. The host has no idea about Dalan. Although he had a good childhood friendship, but the host was sold to his wife by the Qi family for glory, and later the Qi family Dalan returned gloriously, and never had any contact with her. Jia Erlang is no different. Qi family is also a source of misfortune for the host. The host just wants to forget about such a source. Yanj only said that Dejia Kilang was unwilling to support the prince because of diminished male dignity. She did not expect that the man would still miss the host. A person's expressions can be faked, actions can be faked, and even eyes and eyes can be faked, but in many cases, true and false can be felt. At this moment, Qijia Dalan was really forbearing. She looked at him and sighed afterwards, she is fine. She hopes it will be better in the future. I hope the Qi family will send her a wrong Hua road, not a dead end. The host is the princess of the prince. When the prince falls, the host will fall down. The words of the song are clear enough. If Qijia Dalan really has such a little affection for the host, it is really because the host is unwilling to support the prince. After listening to the words, he should think carefully. Of course, if he has his own selfishness, it's not helpful to say more. General, the sweet-scented Osman thus cake fell to the ground, I'm afraid it's stained with dust. Zijun needs to buy 2 more before Yoon Dexuan is closed. She pushed his hand that still stuck her neck, and it goes without saying. He didn't speak, but retracted his hand and bent over to pick up the snack on the floor and place it on the table. Yanj saluted him, "General, leave." She turned to leave, but the man behind her stepped up with her, "I'm with you." Yan Ji turned his head and glanced at him. The man's facial features, Ling Ran, looked forward, his lips clenched, and he didn't mean to explain to her. Yanj is now dressed as a man. She has a thin figure, and because of wearing elevated shoes, a man's robe is worn on her, which makes her figure slender and clear. Even if the thick powder was smeared on her face, she couldn't hold back her fairy-like elegant grace at all. But when walking with the 5 big and 3 rough Kijia Dalan, the poem-like beauty of Yushulanzi immediately became weak and petite. After my death, the villain blackened again. Author, Ben Gong Wei Pang. Chapter 229. It is really this Kijia Dalan who looks too mighty and has a strong spirit, and although he is a rough man, he has strong facial features, and the man's male beauty is fully exerted on him. It's almost evening, and there are not many people on the street, but everyone will secretly look at Yanj and Kijia Dalan with a strange look. Both men are handsome and handsome in 2 different styles. When they stand together, they do not suppress each other, but they set off each other, which makes them more attractive. People are tangled for a while and do know which one grows better, and those young girls who are in the spring are not sure who to throw the sachet in their hands. After a little tangling, the 2 men were far away from them, so they could only look at the back of the beautiful men who were moving away. Yoon Dexuan's cakes were bought, and Yan Geti was in his hand, and his heart was relieved. Ma Yan followed her and said nothing. It was just like dragging a big rock around him, it was too stressful. Now she can finally get Marley out of this person. She looked up and smiled at Kijia Dalan with a smile. As soon as she wanted to talk, Kijia Dalan said, "Where is she? How is it?" He had asked her that for the 3rd time. With a dignified expression and a serious voice, he didn't perfunctory or joke every time he asked questions. "Every time I asked, it was like never before." It was dark, and Yanj looked into the bottom of his deep eyes. She smiled, but immediately recovered as usual. Since the song saw Dajia Kilang to this day, what he has said to her may not be more than 5 sentences. Of course, there were 3 times when he asked about the host. 3 interrogations, though the same, were not perfunctory each time. Without further words, Yan Ji can understand his feelings for the host from his 3 interrogations. This time, she also watched him solemnly and answered, "The prince is very good to her, very good. But she is just a beautiful lady beside the prince. If there is no place for her, the prince will send her out one day, presumably easy." Kijia Dalan nodded, and he still wanted to speak, but Yanj had saluted him again, "General, it's not early, I'm going back, and I'll see you again at some future date." Not far ahead of her, an inconspicuous carriage stopped there. Kijia Dalan glanced at the carriage, and the carriage was all the way behind them. He moved his lips, and finally said nothing, just stood in place, stared at Yanj on the carriage, and watched her wave at him again from a distance. The moment he opened the curtain, his eyes narrowed. There was a man in the car. Even though he couldn't see the features of the man because of the dark inside of the car, but his sharp eyes, he saw the man embroidered the boots of the golden python at that moment. He couldn't see the facial features of the man, but he could feel that the sharp eyes of the man also fell on him at that instant. The moment the curtain was lifted, it was lowered again. The eyes where he and the man meet in the void are also blocked. Fingers squeezed tightly and let go. Kijia Dalan's lips were tight. She has no throat. Even if the clothes were high-necked, he felt it while pinching her neck. Not only did she not have a throat knot, he also saw the tiny red mole on the inside of his wrist when she rubbed his palm. How is this possible? He had heard a very favored bookboy beside the prince, he had heard the prince's very unusual rumors about this bookboy, and he sniffed. But along the way, he followed her step by step forward. My mind is full of rumors that I have heard. Zijun, Shaejun, word difference, but the two identities are quite different. Is she? After my death, the villain blackened again. Author, Ben Gongwei Pang. Chapter 230. Chijia Dalan was not sure. He couldn't believe it. But when he saw the one in the carriage, all his guesses came true. Until the carriage disappeared from sight, he bowed his head, and his clenched hand slowly released. Obviously, the man is very tall and big, but he walks on the road but gives people a kind of emptiness and wavering that seems to follow the wind. Yan Ji did not expect that the prince was sitting in the carriage. As soon as she lowered the curtain, the prince rushed forward in surprise. His Royal Highness, he seems to be loose. The prince did not hug her. He held her chin up and raised his eyes on her neck. The other hand loosened her collar slowly. At the white neck, the purple was startling. Yanj wanted to laugh, but her jaw was pinched, and she smiled unnaturally. As soon as the prince touched her finger, she immediately shouted, "It hurts. It hurts, your highness," lightly. The prince heard this, and instead of tapping it, he pressed it again with his fingers. Yan Ji is taking his air conditioner, and even shook his body. With a cold voice, he asked, "Isn't Kingsi following you?" It wasn't a big deal at that time. Yan Ji was napping, but his voice gradually lowered in the prince's increasingly cold eyes. She wanted to show her head down, but prince's fingers kept pinching her chin, so that she couldn't move. She blinked, and poorly stunned the prince. "In fact, I also wanted Ching San King Si to kill him, but I thought that this guy would still be useful to his royal highness, so I endured." The crown prince frowned, "All for the palace." He traced his words on the lips of Yanj and looked at the face condescendingly. Who can think of another face underneath such a face? That man, probably could not have thought of it. The prince's lips slightly lifted, he opened the dark box in the car with his other hand, took out the plaster, and wiped it on the neck of Yanj. He has a gentle hand and a focused look, but his heart is pervasive. The beauty he held in his hand, even if he needed to be broken one day, he would do it himself, and the people beside him were really ineligible. Yan Ji whispered, "His Royal Highness, what kind of medicine is this? It's really cool. But I want to shift the apparently dangerous topic." The prince did not respond. The atmosphere in the carriage was not great. Yanj stiffened his head and said, "Stop, your highness, don't you get mad, Shaejun will never do that again." He finally said, "What will happen?" Yanj hurriedly said, "His Royal Highness doesn't want me to do anything, I will never do anything again, your highness, I will listen to you in the future." He stared at her apparently flattering, still frowning. But the strength of her hand to apply the medicine suddenly increased. "If you are touched by another man in the future, where will you be touched, where will this palace cut you?" Yan Ji looked up in surprise, and looked into his gloomy eyes. "The lambs, which have not been exposed to the mountains, have teeth." She nodded, her voice weak, "His Royal Highness, if someone bullies me, shouldn't that have cut that person off? Why does your highness only cut me off?" After the ointment had been wiped, he retracted his hand and plugged the plug of the ointment. "This palace has cleanliness. The beauty of this palace has been touched by others, and this palace only wants to be destroyed." Pushing back the dark box, he slowly lay on the back, raised his eyelids, and looked at the words that seemed to be shocking. He continued, "But rest assured, then the palace will burn you into ashes and put them in bottles. You can see this palace every day on the Bibeo Pavilion." Words of song. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. After my death, The Villain Blackened Again. Author, Ben Gongwei Pang. Chapter 231. Yanj thought he was perverted enough in the prince. But now, her abnormal index is obviously nothing compared with the prince. Then if someone robs me one day, she bent over and crawled on his lap, looked up at him, and asked curiously, if someone fancy me, take me away, your highness hit but that guy, what will happen then? This is also extremely provocative. After all, for the prince, whoever dared to rob him of a woman with more than 10,000 people? Don't worry, he squinted and touched her face with his palm. If this palace can't protect you, it will kill you. This comforting word did not comfort the words at all. The song no longer spoke. She squinted, like a lazy cat nesting on his lap. It may be that this time when I went out to see the wind, the prince suddenly started to have a fever and cough in the middle of the night. The prince was fragile, and this was a matter known to all. It is for this reason that other princes are just about to move. In the host's lifetime, the prince was abolished before marrying a concubine. Although the emperor later gave him a woman, he did not have much fanfare. Although the prince was still a succeed this time, it was strange that he had not been abolished, and therefore, the matter of the crown prince was put on the agenda. The queen probably wanted the prince to have a son to consolidate her position, and she also wanted to find a powerful family for the prince, so she was extremely concerned about this matter. Because of this, the capital has been extremely lively recently. The crown prince chose the concubine even with those older princes. Everyone wants to be the one who benefits the most in this consort election. The prince, who is the most concerned, is entangled in sickness, not paying attention to outside affairs at all. The prince's illness has always been looked after by a special doctor. Even if Yanj is the prince's favorite girl, even if she is his powerful think tank, Yanj has always been in a state of inquisitiveness about his illness. She felt that the prince seemed to be hiding her deliberately from letting her know his condition. What is there to hide? He was reluctant to let her know unless it was an incurable disease. However, he did not want her to know, even if he guessed a little. Yan Song pretended to know nothing. The crown prince's affairs were not finalized. The queen personally visited prince's house. Yanj was in his backyard at that time, and did not know what the queen and the prince had said, but only knew how long the queen had left, and the matter of choosing a concubine ended. This time all the princes who have reached the age are given a marriage, only the princess is still vacant. When the prince was ill, Yan Ji had been waiting for her as Gigi, and she had no chance to participate in the affairs of the prince's house. She had already guessed that the prince was dragging her to serve the bed, and was also giving her a warning. He gave her her glory, her masculine status, and the power at her disposal. Once he wanted to take it back, it was instantaneous. When the prince's illness got better, it was also at the border customs mutiny, when General Chi led his expedition. Farewell that day, I have not seen Chijia Dalan for half a year. This time, the prince was still in the restaurant facing the street with the words of men's clothes, watching the Jia Lang lead away. The prince asked the song, "You said, can he win?" "I don't know," Yanj said, "I don't know the situation of the border." The prince turned to look at her, "Want to know?" Yanji was surprised, but his face was calm. "His Royal Highness wants me to understand, and I will understand. After my death, the villain blackened again." Author, Ben Gongwei Pang. Chapter 232. The prince banged his fingers on the table, and seemed to be meditating, but he did not speak for a long time. Yan Ji bowed his head and remained silent. When I returned home in the afternoon, someone in the palace gave a prince a relatively rare bald eagle child. How terrible that would be when he grows up beside the birdcage. The prince listened with great interest, but after the left, he asked the palace person to send a knife. He cut the throat of the baby hawk that might become the eagle king in the future. Blood splashed on Yan Ji's face. Palace people brought in towels and water. She took the towel and wiped the prince's face and hands, and the prince's eyes kept staring at the birds no longer struggling in the birdcage. Yanj asked him, "Don't like this eagle?" "Like," said the prince. "I like it." After a pause, he said, "But the eagle should fly in the sky. It is an insult to it to keep it in a cage. I like it so much that I can't bear to let it go back to the sky. It would be better to kill it and save it. You can raise it, maybe it admires you, and you don't want to return to the sky." It was not easy to raise it, and I would like it more than Prince Edward said, "But if its wings are tough at that time, it will be sad to fly away." He looked at Yanj with a sad face, and his thin shoulders made him look so fragile. But the words were a little speechless because of his words. The prince's hand was scratched 2 times by the bird's paw, and Yanj helped him apply medicine. He held Yanj's hand when Yanj was about to retract his hand. "June. Okay. Doesn't you think that the naive bird looks like you?" He looked at her with a smile, his eyes soft, just like looking at his loved one. Yanj was a spirit in his heart. Anyway, this is still warning her. She bowed her head and closed her eyes. The prince continued, June, don't worry, you are different from it. That's just a beast, but you are my beauty." His voice was long, word by word, and his voice was full of affection. The words were a little creepy to hear. "The beauty is always late," she smiled, looking up at the helpless but confused prince. "Hanjian always has white hair. By then, how does your highness think of me?" The prince's finger touched her face, a little, slowly depicting her delicate features. "In my heart, even if you become a piece of Lois, it will be my beauty." He put his finger on his lips and held down Yanj's lips, and pressed back the words he wanted to export, and continued to say, "Beauty is not in the skin, Jun, you are in love." Words of song. How could this man's love words always make her hear chills and goosebumps? This can also be regarded as a skill. The chicken sighed sighingly, "This is really hypocritical. If you become an ugly person with squinting eyes and crooked mouth, you won't believe that he can speak to you. The words are deeply sympathetic." "Why not hang up?" said the cub. "This guy should have lost power in the host's lifetime." The chicken was very displeased to see the prince, and could not wait to choke himself. "I didn't enter the palace this time," Yanji sighed, "probably the fate of many people has changed." "Chicken, so what's the point of hurrying into the palace with this guy who can't give you sex?" "Yanj, I'm not the same as you. I think spiritual love is pretty good." The sneer sneered, "You're full." Song, "You're right." The chicken did not speak for a long time, and the wood was tired, but it had not even seen a meaty fish, and it felt miserable.